friends, welcome back and back again to Miss Cassidy Creates. I am Miss Cassidy. If you tried to join us earlier, we started our pumpkin gobs and then the power went out and we didn't get to finish them, which is a super bummer, but you know what? The power is back on, even though it is still raining outside, so we'll see what happens there. And we are gonna make these gobs. The power, the electricity is not gonna stop us. We're gonna make these gobs. So if you were joining us earlier, I'm so sorry if you missed out. If you are still baking those, what you're gonna do, you're gonna wanna just dollop 1 tablespoon of your batter onto the parchment paper and bake for 10 minutes. If you're just joining us now, guess what? You didn't miss anything because we didn't get to finish because the electricity conspired against us. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna do take 2 of making pumpkin whoopie pies or pumpkin gobs, depending on what you call them. If you are from certain areas of, I believe, Western Pennsylvania, where I'm from, we call them gobs. But if you're from other places, you might know them as whoopie pies. And they're 2 delicious cakey cookies that we sandwich some delicious frosting in between. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna try and do this again. We're gonna make them this time and hopefully weather is gonna cooperate with us. The ingredients you need for our pumpkin gobs. You're gonna need pumpkin. You're gonna need pumpkin, obviously. That's the most important thing. We're gonna use 2 15-ounce cans of pumpkin puree or 1 30-ounce can like I've got. We are gonna use some vegetable oil. We're gonna use some vanilla, some baking soda and baking powder, some brown sugar, some fun fall spices, whatever fall spices you like best. I've got ginger, nutmeg, cloves, and cinnamon. So whichever one of those, you could also use allspice. You could use, what other ones do I even have that we could use? Let's see. You could use some sage if you wanted. You could use pumpkin pie spice if you've got that laying around. We're gonna need 3 eggs and some icing. You can use cream cheese icing. I found this super fun orange vanilla icing, which felt perfect for some pumpkin gobs, so that's what I got. You can also make your own icing at home if you want to make buttercream or cream cheese icing, whatever you like best. And salt. That's the last thing we need. So we've got all of our ingredients listed in the video as well, but a quick rundown one more time. Pumpkin, flour, veggie oil, baking powder, baking soda, salt, herbs and spices, brown sugar, and eggs. All right, we're gonna get going on this again. Those of you that joined me earlier, welcome back. I hope yours turned out. We're gonna bake a whole new batch for our friends that weren't here, because also, here's a weird thing. The video disappeared. When my power went out, the video's gone. I can't find it anywhere. So we're just gonna start over, and that's okay. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us, friends. I'm glad you enjoy it. All right, we're gonna get started here. And the first thing we gotta do is we're gonna combine our liquid ingredients, our wet ingredients. So that's the pumpkin, the vanilla, the eggs, and even though this is not a wet ingredient, we're gonna add the brown sugar at this stage too, because we want the sugar to get a chance to break down and to not be too grainy when we bite into it. So we need it to combine with the other wet ingredients. So we call this process creaming in baking, where you're using the butter and the sugar, or in this case, the pumpkin and the sugar, and you put it together early before you add any of the dry ingredients so that you can go ahead and make sure they get nice and combined. So we need 3 cups of pumpkin puree. We just want to use pumpkin puree, not pumpkin pie. I will have the recipe written and posted afterwards. Absolutely, we're going to post that. For right now, the ingredients should be in the description of this video. If they're not there, pop in the comments and let me know. I can check something and try to fix it as we go. But we're going to go ahead and just talk through the process for right now, and then I'll go ahead and I'll post the full recipe afterwards. You want to use pumpkin puree, not pumpkin pie mix. If you have pumpkin pie mix, that is okay. If that's what you bought, that's fine. We just won't add any other additional spices to it, because otherwise you're going to get smacked in the face with a lot of spice. So we're going to take our pumpkin puree and we're going to measure out 3 cups. 3 cups of our pumpkin puree. Can we see that? Yeah, all right. 1. Did you know that pumpkin grows on every continent in the world? Not just in the United States or not just in Central America where they first were discovered, but everywhere except Antarctica. It's too cold in Antarctica, but everywhere else grows pumpkins. And lots of different cultures use pumpkin in their food. Maybe for dessert, maybe for dinner, maybe for soup, breakfast. There's a lot of different ways you can use pumpkin. That's our 2nd cup. Let's use our 3rd cup now. If you're using, if you want to just dump the can in, you can. But I think it's kind of fun and good practice for our littles to go ahead and practice measuring out. That's some good motor skills to work on there. Taking the time to measure out our ingredients. 3 cups of pumpkin. Not only can you use pumpkin in pretty much every meal of the day, you can actually eat every part of the pumpkin in some way, shape, or form. You can use the stem, the seeds, the pulp, the skin. Every part of the pumpkin is edible if you prepare it correctly. So we've got our 3 cups of pumpkin puree. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to take our brown sugar. We're going to take some brown sugar. We're going to add 2 cups of brown sugar. 3 cups of pumpkin puree, 2 cups of brown sugar. Oh, that's where it went. I put it in the sink. You can go ahead and you can use that same 1 cup measure that you've been using because it's all going to go in the same place. We'll rinse it before we get to the dry ingredients. So measure out 2 cups of brown sugar. I'm going to use my spatula to make sure that I get all of it out from the inside there. You can use your fingers if you want too. Just make sure you wash your hands. All right, we've got pumpkin, we've got brown sugar. We need to add the rest of our wet ingredients. We're going to add a cup of vegetable oil next. A cup of vegetable oil. You got to be careful with that vegetable oil when you're pouring it, right? Because if you pour it too fast, you're going to pour it right on over. You're going to make a big mess, but that's also why I like to. You can pour over your batter, or if we've got little ones that are really pour happy, what I recommend is keeping an extra bowl out. And that way you can measure things over the bowl. And that way if it spills in, like if we had spilled this whole cup and gone way overboard, you're not adding extra oil to your batter. You just have a little extra slop bucket as a little practice for our little hands that are still working on measuring and pouring things. We've got 3 cups of pumpkin. We've got 2 cups of brown sugar. We've got 1 cup of vegetable oil in there so far. What other wet ingredients do we have that we need to talk about? Vanilla, right? Yeah, we need some vanilla. We're going to add 1 tablespoon of vanilla. So this is a great way for your extra bucket to come in. Pour that out over your extra bucket, and that way, if you over pour, you're just spilling in there. And you can pour it right on into your batter. This is also really helpful for eggs. We're going to talk about eggs next because eggs are super important in baking. They are really useful, but they do a very specific scientific thing when it comes to baking. So before we start adding our eggs, we're going to stir up all the ingredients that we have so far. Our 3 cups of pumpkin, our 2 cups of brown sugar, and our 1 cup of vegetable oil with a tablespoon of vanilla. Mix that all together. And next, we're going to add the eggs. Now, we're going to add 2 whole eggs first. But what I like to do is I like to crack my eggs into a separate container. Because if you've ever cracked eggs before, you know it's probably really easy to accidentally end up with some eggshell in there. It happens all the time. So this is a good way to crack your egg nice and carefully and to be able to look and make sure you don't have any extra eggshell in there, anything that's going to get in your batter and make it not taste very nice. Pour that 1 egg in and we're going to mix up just that 1 egg to start. Because what eggs do in baking is they help to combine the oil and fat along with the water in our bake. So we've done an oil and water experiment before. Oil and water doesn't like to combine, but we need it to work together when we're baking. So the egg takes that oil and that water and helps to emulsify, what a cool word, emulsify together so that they can work together to make that delicious texture that we like. So we need the fat in the eggs and the protein in the eggs to help combine with the water that's in the pumpkin, the water that might be in the butter if you use it, and then the fats that are in the oils and everything else that we use. This is our second egg. We're gonna go one at a time so that we make sure it gets nice and emulsified. Can you say emulsified? And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna add just one egg yolk to this batter. Do you know what part of the egg is the egg yolk? It's that yellow part right in the middle. The egg yolk helps to add some moisture, to really add some nice texture to our cake. And a good way to separate that egg yolk is we're gonna take it and we're gonna really easily break that shell. And you're gonna see here, you see that part that's pouring out? That's that egg white that we were talking about, the part that's around. And what you could do is you could pour in between the eggshells, but that gets a little difficult. What I like to do is I just pour that egg yolk right into my hand, and super gently I just go back and forth, until that egg white peels itself off. And you can see I've got the yolk all by itself there and the egg white in the cup. Go ahead and toss that egg yolk in. Give your hands a nice little wash. Get all that egg off of there. This is a great trick for whenever you're making anything cakey. Adding a little extra egg yolk, 1 or 2 extra egg yolks to your batter. It's a nice way to make them really moist and fluffy. So we're gonna stir up that last egg yolk. And now we've got the pumpkin part of our pumpkin gobs. We're gonna put that aside now. We're gonna let that kind of just sit by itself for a second. And we're gonna add our dry ingredients next. And like I said, we do that separately so that way the sugar involved in our pumpkin puree has time to break down and it doesn't have that grainy sugar texture to it. So that way it's nice and smooth. So now we're gonna move on to our dry ingredients in a separate bowl, which this one's a little dirty because like I said, we've already done this once today, but the electricity fought against us, so we're doing take 2. I'm gonna have a lot of pumpkin gobs when this is all over. We're gonna measure out 3 cups of flour. I would use a new measuring cup or wash and dry the one that you used before, because now we're gonna be probably dipping that measuring cup into our flour, and we don't wanna add the pumpkin and the egg and the sugar and everything else that might have gotten mixed up before. We want it to be nice and clean. So 3 cups of flour. 1, and it's important when you're baking, you want them to be nice level cups. So you see how that's just going right over the top there? It's not a big heaping cup. It's not piled on top. It's nice and flat. You want to make sure you're always using flat cups when you're doing baking. Because baking is very scientific. It's a lot like chemistry. And you need to be particular about it and make sure that you're doing just a little bit, or doing just the right amount and not getting too loosey-goosey with those measurements, because that can change some things. So we've got 3 cups of flour. Next, we're going to take 1 teaspoon of baking powder and baking soda. I know those 2 things sound alike, but they do 2 different things. They are part of our baking science that we learn about. Baking powder and baking soda create different chemical reactions. So sometimes you might only use 1. A lot of times in chocolate chip cookie recipes, you only use, just making sure I was using the right measuring spoon, you might only use baking soda when you're making cookies. But baking powder affects the texture as well. Baking powder can make it a little bit more cakey and fluffy. So we're using a little bit of both so that we get that nice fluffy texture that we like from whoopie pies or gobs, whatever you want to call them. I like gobs personally. It makes me think of my home because it's definitely, that's what they're called in Western PA, and that's where I'm from. And we love gobs, all sorts of flavored gobs. So we've got 3 cups of flour, 1 teaspoon of baking powder, and 1 teaspoon of baking soda, 1 teaspoon of salt. 1 teaspoon of salt in there. And now we get to add the flavor. So, like I said, if you used pumpkin pie puree, then you don't need to add any extra herbs and spices because that's already spiced and ready to go. You could taste your pumpkin puree. Don't take it from in the bowl that we just mixed because you've got the egg in there. But if you still got some in your can, you can take your finger and taste a little bit of it and see if you think it needs any other herbs and spices. But if you just use the pumpkin puree like I did, it doesn't have any herbs and spices in it yet. That's just straight pumpkin flavor. So we need to add some delicious herbs. I like to use a lot of fall flavors, so I'm going to use a lot of cinnamon. I'm going to use 2 whole tablespoons of cinnamon because I love cinnamon. You can use a little bit less if you're not as big of a cinnamon fan, but I would maybe keep it at 1 tablespoon. Even if you're not a big cinnamon fan, keep it at that 1 tablespoon. But I use 2. Now I'm going to go to my ginger, and I'm just going to use 1 teaspoon of ginger because ginger can be a really strong flavor, and we don't want it to overpower everything else that's going on. Then I'm going to use 1 teaspoon of cloves. And it's nice when you're baking with spices like this, take a second to smell them. It kind of gives you an idea of the flavors and the smells, because smell is a big part of taste. Smelling the thing before you taste it helps your brain to understand what flavor is going to happen. Have you ever had something that smells different than it tastes? Or maybe you smell something and it doesn't smell good, so there's nothing you can't make yourself eat it because it doesn't smell good, even if somebody else really likes the smell? Same thing with a good smell. If you smell chocolate chip cookies in your house, doesn't it make you want to eat them even more? Smell's a big part of our taste, so smell your herbs as you're going along. And then I'm going to add 2 teaspoons of nutmeg because I love nutmeg. 1. Ooh, that was a big one. So this is actually a great example of what I was talking about. That is a heaping teaspoon. Do you see what I mean? How there's that nice little pile on top? But we don't want a heaping teaspoon. That's too much. So I'm just going to take my finger, I'm going to slide it over the top, and that's how we end up with a nice, flat, even teaspoon of nutmeg. So you've got your 3 cups of flour, your 1 teaspoon of baking powder, your 1 teaspoon of baking soda, your 1 teaspoon of salt, then your herbs and spices, which you can play with the amount that you put in. But what I did was I did 2 tablespoons of cinnamon, 1 teaspoon of ginger, 1 teaspoon of clove, and 2 teaspoons of nutmeg. Then you're going to take all our dry ingredients and you're going to mix them together so they're nice and incorporated, nice and combined. And now we get to add it to those wet ingredients that we have waiting over in the corner here. So grab your bowl of wet ingredients. Ooh, I got a little flour at my nose. I feel a sneeze coming. Oh, maybe not. Maybe not. Now we're going to add just a little bit of this dry ingredient at a time because when we add it all at once, it's real easy when we're stirring for it to all blow up in our face and cover ourselves. If you can actually see, that happened to me a little bit when we were making this last time. And I'm covered in flour. But if you add just a little bit, I'm going to add about half of those dry ingredients and mix that in with our wet. It makes it a lot easier. Makes it so you're not as likely to end up spilling all over. But you know what, friends? Sometimes making a mess is part of learning. So if you make a mess, the only thing you got to do is make sure you help your grown-up clean it up. We don't make messes while we're learning and then leave them for the grown-ups to clean up. We're going to help. So now that I've got that nice and mixed together, stir, 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 work those muscles. We're gonna add that second half. And do it again. We're gonna stir it all up. Get it nice and mixed together. We don't wanna see any white floury bits. We wanna get it nice and mixed so that it is all one color. Like if you look in there right now, you see how you can see bits of the flour in there? We don't want that. We want it to be all mixed together. And this can be hard work, especially for little arms. So if you need to ask for some help, that's okay. But also, build those muscles. Stir, stir, stir. Do you see now how there's no white mixed in there? It's all just some nice mixed together whoopie pie batter. All right. So they are all mixed together. You need to preheat your oven to 350 degrees. That's what we're gonna bake these at. So go ahead and preheat your oven to 350 degrees. We're gonna let that preheat while we get them ready to bake. Put away, this is my cute little recipe book that I have all my recipes in. Who doesn't love a donut notebook? We love a donut notebook. So let's get that oven preheating. All right. And now you're gonna wanna grab your cookie sheet and some parchment paper or silicone baking mats if you have them. You can do I would highly recommend doing this with parchment paper, something underneath. That's gonna give you the best results. If you don't have that for whatever reason, you don't have any in the house right now, that's okay, that happens. What I would suggest is greasing your cookie sheet, but it's gonna make the bottoms of them come out a little bit differently because that grease is like butter. It's gonna make it smoke and it might burn it a little bit on the bottom, but that's okay. We're gonna put some delicious filling on the inside to help make up for that. But if you've got it, let's lay out some parchment paper. Parchment paper or silicone baking mats if you've got bakers in your house. If you love to bake in your house, I highly recommend silicone baking mats. They are great. Get that parchment paper laid out, and you're gonna take a tablespoon. Take a tablespoon, and we're gonna plop out little 1 tablespoon measurements of our batter. You wanna go ahead and this can be a heaping tablespoon. You know how we were talking about leveling our tablespoon? It's okay if this one's heaping and kind of flowing on top. You're gonna wanna do a little plop right on down there. You can use your finger to help get it all out. And then use the bottom of your spoon to kind of spin it out so that you get a nice circle shape. You don't wanna make them too flat, but you can use that bottom to kind of help coax them along to make them a little bit more round. So you're gonna go ahead and you're gonna leave a little bit of space between each one. I'd say about 1 inch. This is a really fun activity to do together because I like the plop motion. That's really fun. And if you got clean hands and you go and wash your hands before you do this, there's nothing wrong with using your fingers. So if you've got little helpers that wanna help to kind of smooth them out that way, that's okay too. Just make sure you got some clean fingers. So we're gonna plop down, and it's gonna feel like you're making a lot of these. But remember, with whoopie pies or gobs, we're kind of making sandwich cookies, right? We're gonna put something in the middle. So 2 of these is gonna make 1 complete gob. So it's gonna feel like you're making a bunch, but then when you start to put them together, you're gonna be like, oh, this makes sense. Plopping those out. And they don't have to be perfect. They're gonna taste good no matter what they look like. I think I can fit 1 more in there. This is a great opportunity to get a lot of hands involved. If you have multiple cookie sheets, everybody can have their own cookie sheet that they're plopping their batter out on. going out here. All right. So that's my first cookie sheet ready to go. And when your oven is preheated to 350 degrees, you're gonna pop these in the oven, and they only need 10 minutes to bake. Especially if you've done a little bit of flattening here, making sure that they aren't just, you know, a nice pile in the middle, making it so it's a little bit more even. 10 minutes is all you're gonna need for these to bake. And then, we're gonna go ahead, I'm gonna put these aside because my oven's not quite preheated yet. And I bet yours isn't either, but that's okay. You can keep prepping your cookie sheets. Put these over here. I have some that are already finished. I'm going to show you a couple things about these. So, what happens when you don't flatten them out, like you can see here, the top part was not quite done yet when I went and put mine to test them. So, that's what happens when you let them kind of pile like this instead of flattening them out. They'll still cook all the way through. And you've got these beautiful, fluffy little gobs. In fact, I'm going to rip one open just to show you. Ready? Ooh, look at that cake in there. You can see a lot of our herbs and spices flaked in. So good. So good. After they've been in the oven for 10 minutes, chew your food and then talk. You're going to want to let them cool down completely. You want to let them get totally cooled before you go ahead and ice them. Because otherwise, your icing is going to seep out the sides. It's going to get all melty. And I found this super cool orange icing that's just vanilla frosting. You can use cream cheese frosting. You can make your own buttercream if you want. There's a lot of different fillings you could make here. You can use caramel sauce if you wanted. Get creative. What flavors do you like with your pumpkin? But I'm going to use this orange, bright orange frosting. I'm going to start right in the middle and plop it down, and I'm just going to really easily kind of smush it around a little bit, not too much. You don't want to add too much, because when you bite into them, if you've added too much, again, it's going to come all flying out the sides. That's going to be enough. Get those all spread out there, and then you're going to take one of your other gobs and top it just like that. And you have got a beautiful pumpkin whoopie pie. Oh man, this is my favorite fall treat. I think they're so yummy. They're so fun to make. Maybe you want to make a couple different kinds of frosting or a couple different fillings, so you can have different kinds. Or even, these are so good all on their own, just eating them by themselves. So good. So good. All right, so once your cookies have been in the oven for 10 minutes, pull them out, let them cool. Go ahead and ice them up and make a little gob whoopie pie sandwich out of them. And enjoy. So yummy. All right, friends. Thank you so much for joining me, especially if you came back the second time. I'm so sorry for my friends that were following along when we started at 4. The weather was against us. We just ran out of, we lost our electricity for a minute. I hope they finished out okay. I'm going to go ahead and I'll post this written recipe a little bit later today as well. If you took any pictures of your family making these or enjoying them afterwards, we always love to see that. So please feel free to share that and tag us at Miss Cassidy Creates. You can always check out all of our activities on the Facebook page, Miss Cassidy Creates. Our website is up, www.misscassidycreates.com. If you want to look into how you can bring me to your school or your learning pod or your birthday party or your community event, that's a great place to find out more information about that. We will be back next week with a happy haunted Halloween dance party. I love Halloween. I'm very excited. Feel free to get dressed up in your costume if you want. I have some special Halloween overalls I can't wait to debut. I hope your pumpkin gobs are delicious. I hope you had a good time making them. I hope you have a good week. You keep on smiling. You keep on learning. And I'm going to see you real soon. Bye, friends.
Goodbye.